Greetings, Kerbonauts. This is Kerbal Space Program. I'm Bob Fitch, and this is episode number 35 of Project Odyssey. And at the end of the last episode, we had left off with that little lander that was going to go to the moon and bring life support there. However, we had a launch problem. And due to that launch problem, we are now about to be stranded in orbit around the moon until the future when we can send a resource mission, a resupply mission to bring in additional fuel so that we can finish off this landing. Now, it was suggested that perhaps I could send an exact duplicate of the one that you're seeing right here, because maybe it would be more efficient to do that, and then we'd have redundancy. However, if you think about it, the amount of fuel that we're going to bring is less than the craft and the fuel itself, which means the launcher can be much smaller. Plus, we have resupply craft already, and we know that there's a problem with the one that we have here around the moon, which I'll show you in just a bit what that was. But anyway, we know that that problem isn't fixed yet, so unless we want to go and fix that, we have to deal with this craft as it is and just bring additional supplies. One of our other missions we have going right now is this Joule mission. We had sent this satellite to go and scoop up a little bit of the upper atmosphere to bring back that atmosphere so that we could refine it into a medicine that when we rescue Hadfield, we'll have the medicine ready and it will cure him of this sickness that he keeps getting from going into those wormholes and back out again. We had a second interplanetary mission going that we didn't check in with in the last episode. This was the satellite that was heading over to Eve. We want to investigate the source of these strange atmospheric anomalies that have popped up around Kerbin. They look like lightning storms all over the surface, but they're plasma discharges. If we were to hit one of those while launching something and going through one of those pockets, it could be catastrophic. While we wait for our intercept here with Eve, I have one other thing we can talk about. Last episode, I talked about the Oberth effect, and one of the fans of the show thought that I didn't really go deep enough into how kinetic energy is involved in all these equations. And that was completely intentional. I don't really want to get into a whole bunch of the math. I mean, take a look at this right here. Is this the kind of thing that you want me to try and explain, or do you just want to get the gist of it with a description like I had last time that sort of gets you the idea, and if you're interested in it, well, go look it up on the wiki and learn more about the mathematics of it. Our Eve satellite is closing in on the periapsis. That's where we're going to make our burn, of course, once again taking advantage of that Oberth effect as previously described, but not described in this one. We have 958 meters per second of delta V on this craft, and that should be enough in order to make a capture burn. We'll have a highly elliptical orbit after we do that, but it should be enough to start scanning, and every time we loop around the planet, we'll scan a little bit more of it. In 2011, the Juno satellite was launched for a 5-ish year journey to explore Jupiter. It arrives in 2016. This satellite that I have here at Eve is somewhat inspired by the Juno mission, specifically coming in over the pole and then looping around into a highly elliptical orbit is basically the same thing that Juno is going to do. In the case of Juno, it's not just about the cost of circularizing into a lower orbit, it's also about the radiation. The levels of radiation around Jupiter are extremely dangerous and destructive to electronics, and the Juno mission components are mostly protected by a specially crafted radiation vault. I'm approaching that periapsis right now, and because I knew that I was only going to that I was only going to go into the highly elliptical orbit, that meant that I could put way less fuel on this. I only need about, the 950 meters per second, and that's about what I'm carrying. A little bit less than that, and I wouldn't even have been able to make the elliptical orbit in the first place. I wouldn't have captured an orbit, at least not without going down into the atmosphere some and trying to do an aerobraking maneuver, but I probably couldn't have gone low enough to really trim off a lot of velocity in that way. So instead, we're going in by totally the fuel that's on board, But if I had wanted to circularize into a really low orbit, I would have needed to bring at least double the amount of fuel that I have on here right now, and I think a little bit more than that. Most likely I need somewhere around 2,000 to circularize into a really low orbit. Anyway, there goes our capture right now. And now we have to adjust just a little bit because during that burn we went so that the periapsis is just going a little bit through the atmosphere right there, and we don't want to slowly degrade our orbit. So if we just go up to the apoapsis and throw in like 0.01 meters per second or something crazy small like that, we have plenty. We could do it with the RCS if we really needed to. I had been burning my RCS during the burn there because I figured that would improve the efficiency of the actual liquid fuel that we were using by lowering our hydrazine mass. And I knew we weren't going to need that much once we had finally captured our orbit, so I let it get down pretty low. You can see right there that we have about a 4-day loop around Eve. It's 2 days all the way up to the top of the orbit where it slows down so much that it just kind of hangs there for a bit, and then 2 more days back, which actually 4 days isn't so bad. We were talking about the Juno mission earlier. Juno has to spend 2 weeks going around just one time. So now we will wait for our satellite to do that trip. I'm just going to fast forward a bit here. It's going to take, like I said, 4 days. So the downside of that is that 4 days worth of life support is going to be draining out of Odyssey Station at the same time. But I think that just makes it a little bit more realistic because sometimes I launch things like just back to back to back, and you really need to have a little bit of time in between to simulate what should really be happening. It should be taking weeks and months and years, possibly even, to go through all of these different missions that we've been going through here on Project Odyssey. Well, we have a bunch of scientific instruments on here that need to be activated. I didn't have them going because we were on our way up to the top of the orbit, but now that we're really starting that science part of this mission, I think we need to open them all up. We have different scanners for different altitudes, scanners that are trying to analyze different things about the planet, the biomes, the shape of the planet, altitudes, and I threw on here a Kethite scanner anyway. Now remember, in past episodes, I have explained that Kethite scanner, it looks like it's out of the Carbonite mod, it acts a lot like it's out of the Kethane mod, but it's neither one of them. It's Kethite, it's specially crafted, a resource that I have created and exists only here in Project Odyssey. I've been asked a few times if I could make that available to people, and really, there's nothing to make available. There's a file in KSP that allows you to add resources, any kind of resource you want. And all I did was I added a small little text block that described the resource, and then I can make use of it in any parts that require me to do stuff like the scanner or the drilling or the converting of Kethite into fuel or whatever I might want it to do. So there just really isn't anything to expose. Now, that said, all of these files are in the GitHub. So if you really want to get them and not make any of the stuff yourself, just go into the GitHub and grab it. In between missions here, I was checking out Odyssey Station to make sure that everything was working properly and that we had enough life support, and then it would be time for a new mission.
Krantz, Svetlana is on launch pad 14, ready to go.
Great. Come in first, though. We have telemetry from Eve finally coming in. So Svetlana's already in the capsule? She knows the launch isn't for several hours, right? We have a payload on pad 3 we need to send up first.
Yeah, she said she'd just wait in the capsule listening to music. She's really excited about the launch.
Alright, well let's get us...
Class 1 anomaly detected.
Location.
Eve.
Clarify.
Extradimensional communication waveforms.
Source.
The signals exhibit the same signatures as those detected on 7625.4.
That's Svetlana's dimension.
Affirmative.
Can you display the transmission on the main screen?
Affirmative.
Do it.
After opening the wormhole.
Apply phase variance
remember,
filter.
It's critical to
Do that only after phase 3. Got it. How about the radial shearing? What do the scientists say about that? Boost the dynamic range amplifier. We don't have any theories about that yet. It should be possible to maintain structural integrity if you boost the shields 2 seconds into the primary dimension transfer procedures. Alright, we'll give that a try. How about Bill? What's his condition? Same as before? We may have gotten all we need from him. It might be time to eliminate that problem. Once you're through to the other side, and once we're sure he's of no further use, then you're cleared, but not before then.
Transmission terminated. Satellite has gone out of range.
Well, now we know what happened to Bill.
Don't tell Svetlana anything yet. We need to figure out what we're going to do first. Proceed with the moon mission.
Even though Svetlana is sitting in a capsule on another launch pad, she's jumping the gun a little bit because we have another launch to send up first. This one is a simulated launch of a new space station module that's going to go up and dock with Odyssey Station. We need a whole bunch of extra living space on the station. As you may recall in a previous episode, we talked about how we need to have a certain amount of living space. The specific amount varies by the duration of how long we're supposed to be in that station or spaceship or whatever. But Odyssey Station is a very long duration, so it needs the maximum amount of living space, which is 20 times the crew size to what is actually on the station. Well, I don't think this particular launch is going to do very well at getting that extra living space up there. It turns out that we're missing an important component of our remote tech network, an antenna. I don't know how I managed to miss that I hadn't put an antenna on there when I was building it, because I do have my checklist. Maybe I just forgot to look at the checklist. In any case, clearly we have gone too high, we're out of communication, and the engine cut out. The solid boosters continue burning, but the main engine goes out if you lose communication. For our second simulated launch, I have 2 new antennae on there. We have one up in the fairing and one down in the middle interstage. The one on the fairing is on the payload. The one in the interstage, of course, is going to be... Uh-oh, we had something explode right there. Well, looking at that analysis of how the flight was going, it seems that one of the docking ports exploded. I'll explain what was up with that in just a second. To finish my previous thought, I was saying that there was one antenna on the payload and one in the interstage, which is attached to that lower stage, which will allow me to flip it around and retroburn and deorbit it once we're done with it. Now, getting back to the docking port problem, there are a few docking ports on the payload because it's going up to Odyssey Station and we want to have extra places that we can dock up spaceships or resupply craft. However, this simulation is showing that we're having an issue with some overheating. And while a little bit too focused on checking where we're overheating, we didn't throttle back up enough before releasing the SRBs. And so they slam into the fuel tank and it explodes. Oh dear. Well, the overheating problem may have been just from flying a little bit too shallow of a trajectory. So we'll just turn this into a staging test to make sure that at least the rest of it de-stages, decouples, or whatever properly. Well, that and just watching things explode. And getting back to the docking port problem, that's because sometimes Ferrum Aerospace doesn't completely protect the payload. It thinks that radially attached things sometimes are experiencing aerodynamic stress that they really shouldn't be because they are technically protected, but it doesn't know. Well, that's a weird bug. I've never seen that one before. When we pause, the camera still shakes. Odd. Whatever. Okay, so that docking port, the radially attached one, we need to somehow tell Ferrum that it shouldn't rip it off because it technically is protected. So the way that I do that is I go to a custom config file that comes with Ferrum Aerospace and I modify a little greeble section and I add my docking port to that section, telling it that it shouldn't rip it off. It shouldn't even treat it as really being attached for aerodynamic stress purposes. I wish that I didn't have to do that because it's not technically true, but I guess it is true in a way as long as that fairing is still attached. Well, it looks like we may have shaken all the bugs out of the system because this one is well up into where it could be in orbit. We just need to make a circularization burn. Everything's decoupling properly. So I think it's time for us to revert and do the real launch. This one is going into a 90-degree trajectory just for the testing purposes, and the real space station is on an inclined orbit. So we have to wait until we're until mission control is coming under the orbit before we can launch the real one. A few extra seconds of the test before we truly revert allows us to check to make sure that the Delta V does look like it would be enough to get us into orbit and match up with Odyssey station so that the space tug there can grab onto it, as well as checking the action groups to make sure that they're working. And then we revert and we go for the real launch. You could see a couple things at the beginning there. One, that I had already fast forwarded a few times. I think it was maybe 3 times around for Odyssey station before it was going over mission control at the exact same time that we were going under the orbit, allowing me to make my launch and try to match up with it. But the other thing you could see there was that it keeps on saying every single time I start off that the water and maybe some other life support supplies up on Odyssey station are running low. Well, we've talked about that in the past before. They really aren't running low. What's happening is that they run down, but it doesn't know that the recyclers are running, so I just switch over to Odyssey station. The recyclers catch up and it realizes everything was okay, that there's plenty of water, and it doesn't need to throw warning messages at me for a little while. But I don't really get a lot of loops around before it believes it has run out. So I actually see that message quite a bit. Now for the real launch here, you'd already seen it going up a couple times, so I decided to flip out here to the map view and take a look at the trajectories mod one more time. It's actually really kind of cool the way that you can see that trajectory rising up. We need to flip back over for a second to the real view so that I can make sure my solid boosters decouple properly. I have them set up to decouple in pairs. Well, not pairs, there's 3 at a time, but a pair of 3 at a time. Since we had 6 on the outside, I didn't want them to collide with each other on their way down, so I did 3 and then another 3. After that, we're going to get an opportunity to flip back out to the regular map view and take a look at that trajectory again. I'm going to try to get my ascending node and my apoapsis to overlap as much as possible, or descending node, or whichever one's out there right now. Overlap as much as possible as we're making our way up so that I know that we will be as close as we can be once we can finally get that close approach marker to hit the target orbit from ours. And that is exactly what we have done right there. We're within a few kilometers of each other, but I will want to refine that just a bit, probably up close to that descending node and apoapsis area. That's where I'll get my most efficiency and the easiest maneuver that I can make to finalize that intercept. However, even though I have technically finished this, I'm running out of time for the week to edit it all and get it into my video. I had a pretty busy week, so it looks like we're going to have to cut this episode a little bit short. I don't want to do that before I've given you a little peek at what's going to come next week, because I do have some extra video. It takes a little while to get it all edited up. Svetlana's mission, for example, has launched after this one right here has finished up. She's heading to the moon and she's taking with her Neil just in case when Hadfield shows up he needs medical attention. She has multiple objectives on this mission. She needs to intercept Hadfield's expected exit location when he comes out of the wormhole, rescue him, provide medical care, then meet up at the moon with that lander that has some of our life support, refuel it, oversee that it lands properly, and then land herself. Neil and Hadfield will stay in orbit while she works down on the ground. After that, she has a lot of assembly to do to make sure that that base is all set up. And finally, she will return in that lander back to orbit, meet up with Hadfield and Neil, and they will head home once it's all automated. After that, we should have plenty of fuel to supply our space program until we can make it to Duna. Other things that we can probably hope to see next time on Project Odyssey, Might be a little bit more work at the space station. Everything I just described about that moon landing and return back to Kerbin after everything is all set up. Maybe a little more investigation of what's going on with Eve and the strange anomalies that create those plasma discharges in our atmosphere. Find out more about that evil side, the alternate dimension of Kerbals that seem to be undermining us, as well as perhaps the return of the Jewel capsule. Hadfield should be back by then, and so we'll need to finish up his medicine real quick, and that means sending up something that will capture the return capsule coming from Jewel. It has no way to stop, so we're going to have to stop it for it. So that'll do it for now. Until next time, I will see you later, Kerbinauts.